Hi again, everyone. I'm Kathy Zipp, Managing Editor of Solar Power World, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Can Crowdsourcing Work for Your Solar Project? Before we begin, we'll go over just a few house cleaning items. I'd like to mention that this webinar will be available after the presentation on solarpowerworldonline.com, and it will be emailed to all the registrants, so you'll be able to view it again at your convenience. Secondly, there will be a question and answer session at the end of all the presentations. This is a great way to pick our presenters' brains, so we encourage you to participate. You can do so by submitting your questions whenever they come to mind at any time throughout the presentation. You just type them into the GoToMeeting panel on your right. And lastly, we encourage everyone to tweet about key topics and discuss takeaways using the Twitter hashtag SolarWebinar. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our presenters. Today, we're thrilled to have Chris D'Angelo, Managing Partner at Catton, Mukin, Rosenman, David Goldman, Vice President of Project Finance at Mosaic, and Nick Perugini, Director of Business Development at Bella Energy. So thank you all so much for being with us. And Chris is actually going to be our first presenter. Again, Chris D'Angelo is Managing Partner of Catton's New York office and co-head of Structured Finance and Securitization Practice. Chris represents a variety of clients, including issuers, lenders, underwriters, and bond insurers, in a range of programs and projects. So we're thrilled to have him here with us today to share his experience. Chris, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay. Everybody, I guess it's working. Well, thanks, Kathy. Thanks for having me. As Kathy said, I'm a lawyer. Just to be clear, I'm at the Catton Mukin law firm, which is a 600-person or so law firm. I'm in the New York office. We're in Chicago, D.C., and Los Angeles as well. My background is been a finance lawyer really for about 30 years. I started in munis and worked a lot also on utility financings, project finance, and more recently being maybe the past 10 or 15 years, pretty much devoted to the securitization industry. I'm also a member, and I'm going to be talking quite a bit about in my part of the presentation on a couple of studies done by this organization. I'm a member of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory's Solar Access to Public Capital Working Group. And I want to talk a little bit about that. That's an initiative of the Department of Energy. The NREL is the National Laboratory for Renewables run under the Department of Energy. And the Solar Access to Public Capital, or SAPC, is a particular initiative of NREL. And what it is trying to do is basically lower the cost of capital for solar projects. And I'm not a particular crowdsourcing guy, and we'll hear from the crowdsourcing people later on. So what Kathy had asked me to speak about was sort of the broad trends on financing of solar projects. And I'm going to be talking mostly about two studies that were done by the NREL people and released this year. And the first one is what we call the soft cost study that came out in August of this year. And you see the full title there, the Non-Hardware Cost Reduction Roadmap for Residential and Small Commercial Solar Photovoltaics for the rest of this decade. And the soft cost study basically focuses on the fact that, well, we see the hardware costs of the panels have dropped quite a bit in the past few years. And if they want to get to the, well, you see the reference there, the Department of Energy Sunshot Initiative. That's an initiative of the Department of Energy basically to make solar competitive at a large scale with other energy sources by the end of this decade, by 2020. So if you read the release when they first announced the Sunshot Initiative in 2011, it has some pretty glowing stuff like, oh, this is going to be like we're going to put a man on the moon kind of project, and it's a very ambitious project, and it is a pretty ambitious project. And we'll talk about what the study has to say in a moment. It does identify 4 primary costs, which they refer to as the soft costs. One is customer acquisition. You see permitting, inspection, interconnection, installation, labor, and financing. And you'll see in the materials under the list. Oh, there's also a fifth one, which is basically profits and everything else, which the NREL people didn't really think was worth trying to put a lot of time into. But you'll see that the soft costs currently represent about 50% of a residential system and about 44% of a small commercial system. So it's the NREL people have decided that that if we're going to make solar competitive, the levelized cost of energy, the way to do that is really to focus on these costs, because even if the panel prices went to virtually nothing, we would still have to deal with these other costs in making solar competitive. So what the Sunshot Initiative is aiming for is, you see, is to reduce the soft cost contribution to total system costs down to 65 cents a watt for residential and 44 for commercial by 2020, which is actually about an 80% reduction in soft costs for residential and a little more than 80% for commercial, which sounds like a pretty ambitious goal, obviously. Of the soft costs that NREL studied, they actually thought that customer acquisition was probably the best bet to try to get reduced. And the way they propose to do that is basically limiting the amount of times you have to go out to the property before actually doing the installation. And they suggest on that a couple of things, aerial photographs and just fancier software, I guess, to model the system on your desk and not having to go out and look at the house or look at the building a couple of times before actually installing the panels. But the second most profitable thing to tackle, and NREL thought, was financing. And the other two they didn't think were going to be that good a target to focus on. So the NREL people talked to a number of financing experts, and what they said is they thought that, for reasons we'll explain in a moment, that they thought the cost of capital, financing costs for residential projects, could drop by 5%. And just to be clear, that's not the same basis as the 80%. They're basically saying that if a project right now can be financed, let's say at 9%, let's just make this 5. If it's currently at 9%, they think they can get it down to 4% financing costs by the end of the decade, which again is pretty ambitious. How is that going to happen? Whoops, got to go back one slide here. And to answer how come, we're going to turn to the second of the two NREL studies that I mentioned, which came out in April of this year, which is referred to as the SAPC study. And the SAPC study, Solar Access to Public Capital, basically says, basically identified public capital vehicles, which they have 3 major categories for: debt-like instruments, including asset-backed securities, which is actually what I've been doing lately. And also I would put crowdsourcing into that first bullet point. Investment pools and REITs are the 2 other main things they've talked about. And although crowdsourcing itself was not specifically referenced in either of the 2 NREL studies, I think that's probably because we just didn't think about it. Really, it's a relatively new technique, but it certainly seems like the type of thing that NREL would be anticipating to be used for solar. And you see there's a quote there from the SAPC study that the fundamental function of creating a public capital vehicle or security is to pool a set of cash flows to devise a low risk, easily tradable product that enables a broad set of investors to invest. And it's the broad set of investors, I think, that we're going to see the crowdsourcing is particularly useful for. I'm sure everybody knows this, but just to put things in perspective, the way that these projects are financed right now, there's a very heavy emphasis on the tax benefits and the so-called tax equity investors who buy into those tax benefits. And you see that right now it's so closely entwined, and the tax benefits basically represent 50 to 55% of the project's cost. NREL has identified what they think are the characteristics of tax equity investors, the people that are currently doing most of the financing for this industry. And you see a list of them there. They have to have a substantial current and future tax liability. They have to, be able to know what they're doing to do a complex project financing, willing to hold the interest for several years, sink a lot of money into illiquid assets, and are generally pretty sophisticated people who follow things like the tax goings on down in Washington and at the state level. So NREL concluded that first I'll start with the second point there, that NREL estimates that there are fewer than 20 active tax equity investors in the country of any scale at this point in time who can collectively supply, I should have put only in front of that 3 to 6 billion, only 3 to 6 billion a year to the entire renewable energy industry, not just solar. And one of their observations in these studies is that the requirements to be a tax equity investor really limit the number of tax equity investors, obviously, to only about 20. And indeed, that phenomenon soaks up a lot of the benefits of having the tax benefits to begin with. So what NREL is counting on in these studies when they say, oh, we think we can cut the cost of capital down by 75, 80%, is to finance this business in this industry really in a different way, away from tax equity. Now that's going to have to happen in future years when the investment tax credit is reduced. But I think you'll see that even now, crowdsourcing, among other techniques, can be used to help finance a project even with the current tax equity requirements. I would think that of all the public capital vehicles that are currently being talked about, if you actually think about crowdsourcing, and you'll hear how I described it in a moment, it's probably on the opposite end of the spectrum from tax equity investors. I mean, I think if there's only 20 tax equity investors active in the country, I mean, crowdsourcing, I think you'll see, will have the potential to make that hundreds of thousands of investors at least. And the crowdsource investors really don't have to meet any of those long list of requirements for the tax equity investors, except perhaps liquidity, illiquidity. And the same for asset-backed securities. Asset-backed securities are also essentially on the other end of the spectrum from tax equity. So, in a nutshell, the Department of Energy, through the NREL and SAPC initiative, realizes that if solar is ever going to be competitive in this country, and they want it to be competitive by 2020, they've got to focus on things other than the cost of the hardware. Those other aspects are called soft costs, and of the principal soft costs, one of the best bets to actually make solar competitive is to reduce the cost of financing and the cost of capital, and that's what that initiative is about, and that's what the crowdsourcing is about in this business. A couple things I'll just mention real quick for 1 minute. The sort of recent developments as an overview of financing. We did see the first securitization done by Solar City of solar leases and PPAs using asset-backed securities. That closed about a month ago, I think. It definitely proves the concept of using asset-backed securities. It was a rather small deal, and the advance rate, I think a number of people thought was disappointingly low. Advance rate, real quick, by that I mean if you have, they had $87 million worth of collateral backing $54.5 million worth of bonds. So the ratio from 54 to 88 was maybe it was not as great as people had hoped. New York State has commissioned what they call the Green Bank, where they're going to use charges that are existing on-bill charges that are running to the State Energy Authority that are not being used, interestingly, and they're going to direct those charges to something they call the New York Green Bank that will be available to provide financing to developers, to also provide warehouse lines to enable people to assemble pools of solar assets that then could be securitized. So that's an initiative here in New York. Hawaii has, I think, an even more interesting initiative. Again, it's an on-bill charge that they're going to assess on basically all people buying electricity in Hawaii, and they're going to issue bonds and use the proceeds of those bonds to make loans to purchase solar panels. But the payments on the loans on the solar panels actually don't repay the bonds. Rather, this this charge that will be paid by all users, all people in the Hawaii service area, which is the entire state, will actually repay the bonds. Kind of a complicated program, but it's an interesting way of using on-bill charges to fund solar. And Mosaic itself and the crowdsourcing is, I think, another recent development. So with that, I will turn it back, Kathy, to you.
All right, great, Chris. Thank you so much. We appreciate all the information. And now we are going to have David present. He'll be our next speaker. David is sorry, I think I cut out there for a minute. David is the Vice President of Project Finance at Mosaic. He brings over a decade of experience in financing for over 300 megawatts of solar projects. David previously worked at Solon Corporation and SunPower Corporation, and he holds a BA in Economics from the University of California, Berkeley, and is a CFA charter holder. So we're thrilled to have his experience and expertise with us today. So David, go ahead whenever you're ready.
All right, thanks, Kathy. Appreciate that introduction, and thank you, Chris. I think that was some great context setting to dive into really the nuts and bolts of crowdsourcing. So just, I think Kathy covered my background well. You know, over a decade of experience working on solar projects. Probably worked on over 50, successful solar transactions in my career, and very happy to be at Mosaic, which is really, opening up a new source of financing for the industry. And Mosaic, I'm going to walk through in detail what we do, but essentially we're the leading crowdsourcing company in the solar industry. So just to take a step back and talk about what is crowdsourcing, I came up with a short definition here for folks to get oriented. So the way I look at it, crowdsourcing is a way to allow an online community to participate in solving a problem. And we debated whether or not to include the word online, and decided that the internet is really the key factor that has enabled our business and has enabled lots of businesses to bring communities together to solve problems in a variety of situations. So I think it's appropriate to include online in that definition there. So in terms of the problem we're trying to solve, we're trying to bring more capital to solar projects, and then also have it set up so individual investors can participate in solar projects. So lots of folks are interested in solar, but they don't have the right type of rooftop, or they don't live in a state with the right type of incentives, but they want to participate. And so Mosaic has created a way where those folks can be part of the clean energy economy. So in terms of how it works at a real high level, first Mosaic goes out and makes a loan to a solar project. So we act as a lender. We offer right now just one product, which is senior secured term debt. So we work through a process with borrowers and make those loans. And then we post those projects on our online marketplace, and you can go to our website and see the list of active projects there. And then finally, we crowdsource the funding. We bring lots of individuals from our national community into those projects, and they subscribe to our notes, and then they are able to participate in the loan by receiving principal and interest. So just to touch on some of the benefits of crowdsourcing, splitting this up between the benefits of the project and the benefits to the investor, you can see that actually the first two benefits are really similar. To the borrowers of the project, we're able to offer competitive rates and also competitive investment returns to investors. And the way we're able to do that is we take a very small spread in the loan. So if the loan to the project is 6%, then individual investors would get 5% return on the project. So that's one way we're able to make rates competitive and the investment competitive. And then the second benefit for both is that, through our platform, the project owner or project off-taker is able to bring their community along and invest in the project. So if you're a school or even a Fortune 500 company, the students, the faculty, the employees, the customers can all participate in the project by going onto our platform and investing in the particular project. And then on the investor side, there's a couple other benefits. The investment size is low. You can invest as little as $25 in a project. That really, is a low barrier compared to other types of non-traditional investments. And through that low bar, you're also able to invest in lots of projects to create a diversified portfolio. So highlighting the investors here, you can see this graphic. This is an image from our website. It shows a few of our projects. So if you go to our site, you'll see a longer list there, and you can click through and you can see the details and you can see a detailed perspective. So we're very transparent on the terms of the project and the risk. And then in terms of investor eligibility, right now, unaccredited investors in California and New York can invest in projects, and then accredited investors across all 50 states. And then turning to the solar project, really putting our lender hat on. If folks out there have a solar project, what we like to see in order to consider that project, and before putting a proposal or a term sheet together, we'd like to see an executed offtake agreement, PPA, SREC, purchase agreements. We want to make sure that the developer or owner has site control, has the needed interconnection rights to interconnect the system. We like to see a cash flow model with the revenues and kind of standard operating expenses associated with the project so that we can size the loan. And then a high-level project summary with listing the modules, inverters, EPC contractor, and any other relevant facts to help us evaluate the project. And then before we fund the loan, this process is not different from other lenders. We conduct a detailed due diligence process. We engage an independent engineer to write a report. We have an investment committee that needs to approve the project. Before we fund, we'll work with the borrower to execute a loan agreement, and we'll fund, once any conditions precedent are satisfied. Government approvals are required. We need to see insurance and operation and maintenance contracted and set up for the long-term operation of the project. And then we work with the borrower to obtain consent on the major operating agreement. And then in terms of successes to date, we're pretty proud of the fact we've done, at this point, over 20 projects in 6 states, almost $6 million of loans out the door. We just listed another 2 projects for almost $2.5 million on the platform. We have a really robust pipeline with loans signed for an additional $25 million of loans. And, lots of folks are interested in talking to us about their projects, and so the pipeline is growing. And for us, the fact that we're able to loan to projects that are really in the kind of 300 kilowatt to 3 megawatt, or 300 kilowatt to 3 megawatt range has really kind of helped the pipeline grow. There's a little bit of a void in the market at that scale. On the investor side, we have over 2,500 investors across 45 states. As you can see in the graphic here to the right, this is a project that we funded in New Jersey at the Wildwood Convention Center, and all those dots represent individual investors who invested in that project. So you can see we're getting a real broad base of investors, regardless of where the project is located. And then we're also happy that we've been able to have some great funding rounds. In one day, we raised over $300,000. So it just kind of gives you a sense of the interest from individuals. And, to go along with that, we've had 100% on-time payment, and just so you can get a sense of what the rates are, Typically, to the investor, it's 4.5 to 7%. So that's about it. If folks out there have projects they'd like us to look at, please feel free to reach out to me over email. If you satisfy the information we look for, then we'd love to look at your project and work with you. So thanks very much.
Thank you, David. Wonderful. Great information. Our last presenter is Nick Perugini. Nick is Director of Business Development at Bella Energy and leads all team efforts into the front end of solar project analysis, development, organization, and structure, along with strategic partnership alliances. He's been serving business communities across the country since 1988, and after mechanical engineering studies in New York, where he grew up, he worked his way up into business ownership. And then in 2008, he had the opportunity to fulfill a lifelong passion in solar, and he took it. So we're looking forward to hearing from him. And Nick, you can go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Kathy, and thanks Solar Power World for putting this together for everyone. And thanks, Chris and David. You set the stage well. Here I'm going to talk a little bit about, obviously, financing tips for developers and contractors. We're working within complex projects with multiple variables, and an organized process to work your way through these is critical to increase the odds of success. I heard recently that the success rate of solar projects may be as little as 2% on the C&I, commercial and industrial areas. So a couple of things we'll talk about: client expectations, I'm calling it the first sale, and then finance expectations, the second sale. Really, they're one and the same, and they're parallel, but depending on which part of the project you're involved in, they often run in sequence. There's always this balance of priorities in development planning, and of course, a lot like in the analogy of building a building, the foundation blocks of that project are critical. I'm also going to be highlighting, some parallel points as I go through this with the 670 kilowatt Pinnacle Charter School project, where Mosaic, Bella, Spella, and others were involved. That project led itself well into the crowdfunding arena. Next. Let's see. Trying to turn the page. There we go. So a little shameless plug who we are. So Bella Energy is a growing renewable energy developer and EPC. We've been involved in the financing, design, engineering, and installation of projects across the U.S. and abroad. We have 30 years of solar expertise with roots going back to 1982 or so. We've completed over 600 projects. And actually, as of today, we've got over 12 megawatts installed. Another megawatt just went live last week. Early projects were the first utility project in the state of Colorado. A handful of international projects early in the 2000s. Moving on to one of our favorites is Solar on the State Capitol in 2008, and then later on in the more recent 2012, the Solar Palace Convention Center, the largest rooftop solar install in the state of Utah. We built and developed a number of unique projects, and no project is an easy project, unfortunately. Over the years, we've grown from a residential EPC to a commercial and municipal EPC, and later into a commercial municipal developer, and we expect project ownership in our near future. So a lot on the good horizon. So into the nuts and bolts. The development is really a balance of the pragmatic realism and idealistic visionary, which are quite opposite. Finance lives in the real world. So successful finance leads to real facts. You start with, of course, the client expectations. You're looking at a project, there's no sale without the client, which is often overlooked, I think, in the more detailed finance discussions. Of course, you have to start with qualified clients only and know the market. you can visualize the model and the big picture early on. And you have to balance what is financeable and what is acceptable to the client. This may seem like kind of a no-brainer, but it's not to be overlooked. In our Pinnacle Charter School project, that was modeled before ever meeting in person with the client. From almost 2 years before construction, when it was first brought to us by one of our partners, the Atmosphere Conservancy. Modeling is critical, and the ultimate success of a project involves a different kind of green. So your cash flow models and anything in every variable that goes into it to show that it is a viable project to all the parties involved, which will often be more.
So the next point was actually not to overpromise customer expectations. A lot of times the initial contact from that salesperson in the field will want to get that client on board, but setting realistic expectations while consulting your financial partner, know what's acceptable to both a successful project finance and then back into an offer that hopefully the client would accept. Amending these variables later on is a hard negotiation, can kill a deal or derail it for months at a time. And one of the things I also like to highlight is getting these written documents, a client LOI or letter of commitment. It's a milestone with a material result. These material results, which get built upon later, are also critical for engaging the finance partner early on, keeping them engaged, and also leading to success. So kind of the second part of that sale is the finance. There's all the tangible pieces and parts need to be organized to support that data thoroughly. Project executive summary is a nice document to have. That is the project profile. This is a way to share the big picture of any project with multiple parties that are involved. The off-taker financials, of course, this is the bankability. So knowing that you're starting with a prospect that has the bankability to carry this project all the way over and into the end zone is prime. Pinnacle, for example, had variable ownership between the land and the buildings, was sort of quasi-governmental and state-funded. There was layers in there that didn't come up till later on. Always worth trying to find out as much of these early on in the process as possible. You're continually refining the cash flow. There's a small picture of one at the bottom here where that's just one model. This is going to involve the EPC price, there's interconnection costs, permits, the incentives that come into play and support the project over typically 15 to 20 years, property taxes if they exist, if they're exempt, it's insurance, income taxes, land and roof rents, operations and maintenance. Two I left off the list here which are critical, incentives and ITC, which most of us, if you know the market, then you'll know what those are. These are all to meet the needs of all those parties involved. Again, it takes a lot of research. Equipment and design, another feature, more of the physical nature. Ask your finance partner early on what's acceptable and what is not. The EPCs, from their perspective, and the financier may have different views on what is bankable, may have different preferred products. These are details that can be worked out earlier on before you get into engineering permits, which make things harder to change. One of the laments of many of the C&I projects is the length of time for development, closing, and the construction tends to go fairly quick. Anything we as an industry can expedite these, which in turn reduce those soft costs talked about earlier, leads to more successful projects. Again, get to that term sheet from the financier. This is another material milestone. Those will be built on later on. The cash flow itself, as one might model into them, if you have the ability, there's multiple perspectives can be seen from this. So it's really trying to visualize the project from a finance perspective of both the client, maybe the sponsor, the tax equity, could be levered and unlevered, partnership flip. There's multiple models. So all areas where the more knowledge and modeling you can do to understand the full implications of the cash flows of a project, again, going to lead for that successful finance. Development over time is a great balance of priorities. Develop by definition is to grow into a more mature, advanced state. Absolutely. The projects often start with a conversation and a dream, but have to lead to a plethora of digital files, a pile of paperwork, and multiple parties and people involved, everyone with the comfort level, often to fund these multiple million-dollar projects. Development plan and the checklist takes a lot of research as a critical piece of any project. There's many overlapping tasks. It's critical also to assign responsibilities, delegate those tasks. They're not always in a specific order. There's many that would overlap. You need to set deadlines on these types of issues. And often the day-to-day business or other projects can get in the way. So having that responsibility for a party within your organization is critical also. Start your longest tasks first. Interconnection in some markets could take months. In other markets, it might only be a few weeks. So that could be one of them. Legal review, tax equity uses, etc. These will need to be verified with your ultimate partners. If you're working with someone like Mosaic, who's got their ducks in a row, then that part of the project should move a lot smoother. Your contracts will also need to be in order. The contract negotiations I've seen span from 2 weeks on a fast track to maybe 3, 4, 5 months on a long track. The site control, the PPA, an interconnection agreement, an incentive reservation, these are all the main pieces for starting to build those building blocks. The projects will take diligence, tenacity, and perseverance, especially from the person spearheading and typically starting it. That often is the developer. Just got to land my last slide. Building blocks for success. Starting at the bottom, a bankable off-taker. Mentioned this. You can look up various forms of credit worthiness, maybe D&B, Moody's, outsource those kind of checks. Collect the last few years of the audited financials from your off-taker. If they're serious, of course, they'll provide them. Positive project cash flow. That this is modeled realistically. An organized development plan with all the variables accounted for. Professional development in EPC, solid partners there. In the Pinnacle project, we had the Atmosphere Conservancy started with the client, brought it to us here at Bella. We involved someone from DG Energy. That also hooked us into Distributed Sun. I worked with another pair of partners locally. So there was a bunch of people involved, and Mosaic came in towards the tail end to provide that long-term debt. It was an ongoing and sometimes arduous task, but the picture at the bottom of this slide kind of shows a project that we were very happy with. So, and lastly, all this should lead to that project success. Again, I'm Dick Perugini, Director of Business Development at Bella Energy. Feel free to reach out with me. Again, thanks, Kathy, and hopefully this was insightful in at least the basics of having a successful project.
Wonderful, Nick. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. And I think after all the information, our audience does have some questions, so we'll begin asking those. Remember, you can submit your questions at any time in the GoToMeeting panel on your right. So since Chris has had a little break here, we can start with him. Chris, so this question's for you. Someone is wondering, for all the commercial solar projects installed in 2013, I'm not sure if you can get the specifics, but they're wondering what the average interest rate on projects is for the commercial solar projects being financed in 2013.
You know, let me come back to me. Let me go through the NREL study a little bit on that. Let me see if I can hunt that down.
Yeah, would you have any idea, even if it wasn't just commercial projects, if it was just solar projects in general? If not, I'm sure they can contact you for that information.
I am going to say low teens would be my guess as a weighted average cost of capital would be, and I'd frame it that way rather than interest rate particularly.
Okay.
So that's what I would say. But if I can find anything, you hear the papers rustling here, I'll jump back in.
All right. David, I think there has been some confusion about who can put projects on Mosaic and who can invest in them. So would you please just clarify that for the audience?
Sure. So we can make loans to projects anywhere in the U.S. So we've made loans in 6 different states at this point. So there's no restriction in terms of the geography where we can make loans. In terms of your state of residency, if you want to invest in the notes backed by those loans, there are some restrictions. So right now we've worked with California state regulators, and so unaccredited individuals in California can invest, and you're basically unaccredited if on an individual basis you have less than $200,000 of gross income over the last 2 years, or less than $1 million of net worth. And each state is a little different. Those are pretty rough guidelines, and I think our website can give you more precise answer if you have a question about that. And then if you are accredited, so you're above those thresholds, then as long as you're a U.S. resident in any state, you can invest in notes. So hopefully that clears up that question.
I think so. And David, while I have you on the line here, people are asking if Mosaic would finance community-owned projects. Would that be an option?
So community solar projects, is that the question? Like,
yeah.
I know there's a program in Colorado.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So we're definitely interested. I mean, there's a little bit more diligence potentially with that type of project, but we do think those are great complements to each other, crowdfunding and community solar. So we'd certainly be interested in looking at those projects. We're going to go through our standard diligence process. So as long as they're well put together, well contracted, I think we're definitely interested.
We're actually getting a lot of questions from Mosaic. So David, again, what type of credits have you made loans to? Can you speak on that?
Sure. So certainly any investment grade off-taker will consider. We have done projects, like Nick mentioned, a charter school. So we're certainly open to those types of entities. We made a loan to the Ronald McDonald House, which is a cancer center in Southern California. So we're, we can be open-minded about the credit. We just need to make sure that there's a really strong repayment ability on the part of the project over the term of the loan.
We have another question for Chris here. Chris, to what extent are you seeing the use of special purpose entities to finance solar projects in the U.S.?
Yeah, I also, I will answer that in a second. According to the NREL, this year they have a weighted average cost of capital for commercial at about, it's a little lower than I thought, 9.5%, and they're projecting trying to get that down to 3.4% in 2020. So it's basically 9.5% estimated for this year, and to cut by 2/3. In terms of the special purpose entities, for the financing transactions, they're pretty much always used. They're really universally used, I would say. This is not the individual project, but a financing of a pool of leases or PPAs would pretty much always be done with special purpose entities.
All right, and this question is for Nick. Nick, what other types of financing have you tried for solar projects, and what are some of the advantages of using crowdsourcing instead?
Well, we've been involved in a number of, financing models. So some leases, some PPAs, definitely some cash deals, and some private loans through kind of customer direct purchases. I think the value in the current state of crowdfunding lends itself very well to community projects, which I think aligns with Mosaic's goals, if I'm not mistaken, at least at this point. He's expected to evolve, but boy, a school, something that more represents the public, maybe something that's educational for the spread of solar knowledge, that's involved with someone you can not only trust but feel good about helping. I think that's the big piece of crowdfunding.
Yeah, Nick, this is David. So yeah, I completely agree with that. I'd add that for businesses also that want to engage their employees or customers or vendors or different stakeholders, I think the crowdsourcing platform is also a great vehicle for those types of entities as well.
Thank you both. And David, I have a question for you again. Would you once more mention, we're getting a lot of questions about the size of projects that's ideal for Mosaic. What would be too big or too small, or can you comment on that?
Sure. So, I mean, we're typically looking at projects that are 300 kW up to 3 megawatts. The challenge on smaller projects is there's a fixed amount of due diligence we need to do. So we need an independent engineer's report. We need some level of third-party legal counsel assisting us with the project. And there's a fixed set of contracts for all these projects. So the smaller you go in project size, you need to amortize those fixed costs over that smaller project size, and it tends just not to be economic for the borrower. That's really the filtering mechanism. And then on the upper end, I mean, we're starting to do bigger projects. We just put a project on a platform for a $2 million loan. So, that's really our sweet spot, kind of 300 kW to 3 megawatts, which equates to about $300,000 to $3 million of loan size.
And another one for David. Would you be able to explain the difference between accredited and unaccredited investors, and can you give examples of them, just kind of for better understanding?
Sure. Yes, I think like I touched on. I mean, just real generally, you're defined as an accredited investor if you have on an individual basis, over $200,000 of gross income over the past 2 years. I believe you need an expectation of exceeding that in the coming year also. So that's one test. Or you can satisfy it through a net worth test if you have over $1 million of net worth. So those are kind of the two tests. I'd encourage folks to go to our website. I think it can vary state to state, so there's probably a more precise answer for folks' individual case on the website.
I believe this could probably go to anyone, but people are just wondering what you see for solar and financing in 2014. Is there anything that installers and contractors should be aware of, or kind of what's your take on what's going to be happening next year? I don't know if Chris wants to start with that, or
I would say Well, I'm going to focus on those two state initiatives. The one in New York, the Green Bank, and the Hawaii GEMS initiative. I think that they're planning to do that Hawaii bond offering to create the fund towards the middle of next summer. So once that fund gets funded, I would think there would be a fair amount of activity in the state of Hawaii. Here in New York, once that Green Bank gets up and running, I don't have an estimate on that. It's in front of the Public Utilities Commission right now of New York. But let's say that happens in 2014. I think those will be interesting developments because to the extent that you can actually harness on-bill charges across the whole rate base of a utility, that's a pretty powerful tool. So if those two state programs really look like they're successful, I wouldn't be surprised if other states try to copy those. So I think that would be something to watch out for in 2014.
That's great, Chris. Did anyone
I'd like to add one thing to that. Mm-hmm. I think one more thing to keep an eye on is PACE programs, the property assessed clean energy financing, which may be combined with other offers of finance. Something else to keep an eye on.
All right. If, Dave, did you have anything to add to that, or just don't want to skip over you?
Sure. I mean, I'd say that every state is unique. There's always a lot of fluctuations in the various incentives. As a lender, we'd encourage folks to keep focusing on finding high quality off takers and focusing on the diligence process. I really like how Nick talked about the first sale and the second sale. So, I mean, the more focus on, really getting projects ready to be financed, I think is a great area to focus on.
I forget who just mentioned the Green Bank initiative, if that was Nick or Chris, but could you expand on that?
Sure. Yeah, it was Chris. Basically, I guess two things happened. There's a I'll try to make this relatively fast. There's something called NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, which is a New York State authority, to promote energy development generally in the state. It does, regular hydro and all sorts of things besides solar. But it had been authorized years ago to collect an on-bill charge. By that I mean, like, I'm a customer of Con Ed, so I frankly don't look at the bill that closely, but somewhere on that bill is a charge, a special charge that everybody in New York State has to pay, and the money from that charge has been going to NYSERDA for a couple of years. Apparently, it's been unused, or maybe the original reason they put the charge on the bill has been lost, or I'm not exactly sure. But NYSERDA had amassed a pile of money, and I guess this charge is still being assessed. So Governor Cuomo here in New York in January or February proposed using that money to capitalize. It's not really a bank. They call it the Green Bank, but it doesn't take deposits or anything like that. It'll be another state creation that will be capitalized with the money that has collected up and will be collected up off of this on-rate charge. And once that bank is capitalized, what they want to have it do is then they have a variety of options. You make loans to borrowers, homeowners, or property owners for the installation of panels. It also covers, it's not just panels, it covers demand reduction and things like weatherizing and things like that too. But solar is definitely one of the uses for it. So it would basically be low-cost source of funding to homeowners and building owners. It could also be used at a wholesale level, where a big developer or a developer that had some size could then access monies from the Green Bank to build up a pool of solar loans, leases, or PPAs, and then try to do a securitization of those, like the Solar City people had done earlier, back in November. So it's pretty wide open. If you just, I mean, obviously if you Google New York Green Bank, a bunch of things will come up. And if anybody's super interested, they can send me an email. I can send you information about the NREL studies, obviously, or the Green Bank or the Hawaii Initiative. But that's basically the Green Bank is it's a New York State creation that's going to be funded with on-bill charges, which is a great way to finance pretty much anything.
All right, good explanation, Chris. And I think that it's approaching the end of the hour here, so I think that's all we have time for today. But I sure learned a lot, and I hope you did too. If we didn't get to your questions, or if you have additional ones, you can feel free to contact our presenters on your own. All their information is up on the screen for you. And again, this webinar will be emailed to all registrants, so you can view it at your convenience. I know a lot of people ask about slides and things like that, so that will be sent out to you in the next couple of days. And again, I'd like to thank our presenters, David, Chris, and Nick, for doing such an excellent job and sharing all this great information with us. We really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone in our audience for listening and asking those great questions. Your input makes for a great discussion. So I hope you enjoyed it, and we invite you to join us for more Solar Power World webinars. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kathy.